There are questions that do not come to you in search of truth. They come like hooks. They arrive disguised as curiosity, wrapped in the tone of an innocent conversation, wearing the mask of closeness. But underneath it all, they want to pull something out of you that should not be given away so easily. Your peace, your focus, your privacy, your inner security, your direction. And almost always, the trap is not in the question itself. It is in the impulse to answer. Because many people believe that being honest all the time is a sign of virtue, that if someone asks, you should explain, that if someone provokes you, you should defend yourself, that if they want to know, you should open the door to your mind and let them in. But Stoic philosophy never taught that. The Stoics never defended impulsive self-exposure. They never said maturity means saying everything. They never confused transparency with unnecessary vulnerability. Quite the opposite. They knew that a balanced life requires something the modern world has almost forgotten: discretion. Epictetus taught that before speaking, the wise person examines not only what he is about to say, but whether it truly needs to be said at all. Seneca reminded us that the tongue is a dangerous place for anyone who has not yet learned to govern himself. And Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by intrigue, conflict, and constant eyes on his life, practiced a rare kind of strength, the strength not to react to everything, because to answer everything is to become predictable, and whoever becomes predictable hands other people a map of the soul. There is a huge difference between being open and being invaded, between being honest and being manipulated, between having a real dialogue and being pulled into someone else's game. Not every question deserves access to your inner world. Not every kind of curiosity deserves the full truth. Not every conversation deserves your energy. Sometimes what seems like a simple question tossed into the air is actually a probe, a test, an attempt to measure your insecurities, discover your plans, touch your wounds, or provoke a reaction that reveals more than you ever wanted to show. And that is where Stoicism becomes so relevant. Because it is not only useful for talking about suffering, fate, discipline, or self-control in life's biggest moments, it also speaks to these small scenes, these nearly invisible interactions, these ordinary encounters where one badly placed question can throw off an entire day. You have been through this before. Someone asks something with a smile, and you feel immediate discomfort. Someone brings up a subject, and your whole body senses that something is wrong before your mind even has the words for it. Someone insists on knowing what you are going to do, who you are with, how much money you make, why you chose a certain path, why something ended, why you still have not achieved that one thing. And suddenly you find yourself talking too much, explaining too much, justifying too much. Then comes the regret. Then comes that bitter feeling that you gave part of yourself to someone who had no right to receive it. The wise person learns to notice that moment before it happens, learns to recognize the question that does not want to understand, but to invade, learns to tell the difference between dialogue and probing, learns to protect peace the way someone protects a flame in the wind. And that protection is not coldness, it is not arrogance, it is not rudeness, it is awareness. It is understanding that your mind is not a public square. Your pain is not a spectacle. Your plans are not a group discussion. Your truth does not need to be served up in full to anyone who shows up with emotional appetite. At its core, one of the clearest marks of Stoic maturity is this: knowing when silence is more noble than explanation, knowing when an elegant detour is worth more than a confession, knowing when saying little is an act of intelligence, not fear. Today we are going to walk through 9 questions you should almost never answer openly. 9 questions that seem innocent, but often carry judgment, control, comparison, envy, empty curiosity, or manipulation. And this is not about living in suspicion of everyone. It is about learning to recognize the moment when a conversation stops being an encounter and starts becoming an intrusion. Because a man who has no control over his answers soon loses control over himself. And the world is full of people who do not need your total ruin. One detail is enough, one weakness, one plan revealed too early, one insecurity confessed at the wrong time, one explanation given to someone who never truly wanted to understand you. The Stoics knew this, not because they were paranoid, but because they understood human nature. They knew many people ask not to get closer, but to measure, not to support, but to compare, not to understand, but to catalogue. And the person who fails to see that ends up living like a house without a door. Anyone walks in, anyone touches things, anyone gives an opinion, anyone rearranges the furniture of your mind and walks away, leaving the mess for you to clean up. Maybe you spent a long time believing you had to answer in order to seem polite. Maybe you learned that silence is rude, that refusal is selfish, that protecting your privacy is a sign of distance. But it is not. There is a kind of silence that is dignity. There is a kind of reserve that is wisdom. There is a kind of non-answer that saves you from pointless conflict, needless exposure, and regrets that could have been avoided by one simple, firm decision not to feed what does not deserve to enter you. The first question is this: how much money do you make? It sounds simple. It sounds common. In some environments, it even sounds socially acceptable. But very few questions reveal someone's hidden intention as quickly as this one. Because almost never is this question only about money. Usually it is about status, about comparison, about calculation, about figuring out where to place you within an invisible hierarchy that many people carry around in their heads. Based on your answer, some people decide whether they will admire you, envy you, look down on you, use you, or simply change the way they speak to you. And all of that happens in silence, in just a few seconds while you think you are only being polite. The Stoic understands that wealth has never been a reliable measure of human worth. Seneca, who knew both abundance and instability, understood that money becomes dangerous when it starts defining a man from the inside. And that is exactly why the wise person does not hand over this kind of information as if it were meaningless. Not because money is sacred, but because other people's intentions are not always clean. When someone asks how much money you make, what they are often trying to discover is how much power you have, how much status you hold, how much respect they should pretend to feel toward you. And notice how sad that is. Your character does not count in that equation. Your discipline does not count. Your courage, your loyalty, your peace, your honesty, none of that counts. Only the number does. That is why answering this question impulsively can open the wrong doors. It can attract self-serving interest. It can feed useless comparisons. It can spark envy in people who had been quiet. It can create a false atmosphere where you stop being seen as a person and start being treated like a number. The wise man does not live to impress, but he also does not expose himself naively. There is a huge difference between sharing something with someone you trust and allowing yourself to be mapped by just anyone. And that is one of the deepest practical lessons of Stoicism. Not every truth needs to be public in order to remain true. You do not need to lie, but you do not need to open yourself up either. You can answer lightly, you can redirect with grace, you can smile and say you would rather not get into that. You can protect your space without aggression. That is maturity. Because the emotionally weak person feels the need to explain everything. The inwardly strong person knows that certain boundaries do not require a long justification. The second question is even more dangerous, precisely because it often comes disguised as friendly interest. What are you planning? There is an old trap hidden in that question. When your plans are still seeds, silence is fertile soil. When you speak too early, you expose what has not yet taken root. Marcus Aurelius understood the value of quiet action very well. He did not turn every intention into an announcement. He did not make a stage out of his own mind. And that teaches us something deeply important. Plans revealed too soon run the risk of dying before they are ever born. Sometimes the person asking is genuinely curious, but often they are asking in order to measure your steps, anticipate your moves, give opinions nobody asked for, or plant doubt right where you most need conviction. You have seen this happen. You share an idea that was still alive inside you, still fragile, still under construction, And all it takes is the wrong reaction from someone for everything to start losing strength. A look of irony, a quiet little laugh, a comment dressed up as realism. That's way too hard. You really think that's going to work? So many people are trying that. Wouldn't something safer be better? And just like that, in a few moments, what was beginning to grow inside you starts being suffocated by outside voices. The Stoic knows that other people's opinions only gain power when they find open doors inside our insecurity. That is why he does not expose early what is not yet strong enough to withstand the wind. This is not superstition. It is deep psychology. Some projects mature better in silence. Some decisions require solitude. Some goals need work, not early applause. Many people talk about the future as a way to feel, for a few moments, the false pleasure of accomplishment without actually accomplishing anything. Talking creates a temporary feeling of progress, but real progress almost always happens far from conversation, far from the crowd, far from the need for validation. Epictetus would remind us that what matters is not looking disciplined, it is being disciplined. It is not looking like someone about to build something great, it is building it, and building often requires protection. So when someone asks what you are planning, remember this: not every ground can receive seeds, not every ear deserves access to what is still growing inside you. Protect what is still fragile. Not everything needs to be announced, not everything needs to be shared, not everything needs to be explained before it's time. The third question is one of the most invasive, even though it almost always comes wrapped in a casual tone. Why did your relationship end? That question sounds like it is offering space for you to open up. And sometimes the person truly does want to support you, but in many cases what exists there is only hunger for details, hunger for behind-the-scenes drama, hunger for someone else's pain told out loud, as if private suffering were hallway conversation. And here Stoicism teaches us something the world has forgotten. Not every wound needs to be exposed in order to heal. There is a difference between processing pain with someone trustworthy and turning your emotional life into public material for other people's curiosity. When you answer too much on this subject, you run the risk of reliving what you were trying to overcome. And more than that, you risk handing the most vulnerable version of yourself to people who will do nothing good with it. Seneca said that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. And how often does someone, when asked about the end of something, begin reliving every detail, every disappointment, every humiliation, every silence, as though opening once again a door they had barely managed to close? Not every pain deserves repetition. Not every explanation brings relief. Sometimes saying too much only opens the wound again. And there is another problem, even more subtle. When you begin justifying the end of a relationship to everyone, little by little you lose the dignity of your own story. A bond that was once intimate becomes material for other people's narratives. People who were never there start giving opinions, assigning blame, interpreting words, judging decisions, taking sides. Suddenly, what was yours becomes everybody else's conversation. The wise person avoids that waste, not because he runs from truth, but because he understands the value of reserve. Some stories deserve respectful silence, not exposure. Some endings need privacy, not an audience. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, not to show off, but to bring order to his own soul. Notice the difference. Instead of spreading his inner chaos around, he dealt with it within himself, with clarity. That is a powerful lesson for anyone who feels tempted to explain personal pain to any available ear. Your privacy requires discernment. Your heart requires protection, and when someone asks why it ended, you do not need to hand over the most delicate chapters of your life just to satisfy another person's curiosity. You can answer with sobriety. You can say it was a chapter that came to a close, that each person went their own way, that you prefer to keep certain things private out of respect. That is not coldness. That is honor. The fourth question sounds harmless, but it can carry quiet poison. Why haven't you achieved it yet? This one is cruel because it touches exactly the place where many people are already wounded. It could be about marriage, about money, about children, about career, about your body, about success, about anything the world has decided to turn into a required timeline, and then someone asks as though they are just making conversation. But hidden behind the sentence is a dangerous suggestion, that there must be something wrong with you because you have not arrived there yet. This is one of the most violent forms of social pressure, because it makes a person forget that human life is not an assembly line. Every soul matures at its own pace, every destiny knows its own winters, every achievement has an invisible timing that outside observers cannot see. Epictetus would say that suffering begins when we try to control what does not fully depend on us. And much of the anguish caused by this question is born right there. You start measuring yourself by other people's clocks. You begin to feel late because someone else decided what counts as early and what counts as too late. But nature does not operate by human anxiety. A tree does not feel ashamed because another tree bloomed first. A river does not blame itself because another river reached the sea before it did. Only human beings have been trained to live in constant comparison and call that normal. When someone asks why you have not achieved something yet, maybe they are only repeating a broken mindset. But whether consciously or not, the question tries to push you into the territory of self-justification, and in that territory, your peace almost always loses. You start explaining, listing obstacles, talking about sacrifices, revealing fears, confessing frustrations, and in the end, you feel reduced to an absence, as if everything you are means less than the one thing that has not happened yet. Stoicism rejects that logic. For the Stoics, a person's value lies in the way he lives, not in the applause he receives, not in the milestone he reaches, not in the schedule he fulfills. A man can still be far from the result he wants and yet be admirable if he walks with steadiness, honor, and discipline. Another may have achieved everything the world celebrates and still be miserable inside. So when that question comes, do not accept the hidden assumption inside it. You are not a walking delay. You are not a mistake because you are still on the way. You do not need to defend yourself for living your own process. Sometimes the wisest answer is simple and calm. Everything comes at the right time for me, and I'm doing what is mine to do. Without anger, without guilt, without bowing to the pressure to look ahead of schedule in the eyes of people who do not even understand your road. The fifth question often arrives dressed as concern, but many times it is simply a search for weakness. What is your biggest fear? It sounds deep, it sounds intimate, it even sounds beautiful. But asked by the wrong person in the wrong setting, it becomes dangerous. Because your deepest fear is not entertainment, it is not casual conversation, it is not filler for an awkward silence. It is an access point. It is a map of the places where you are still vulnerable. And the problem is that not everyone knows what to do with what you confess. Some will minimize it, others will use it, and others will store it away for the precise moment when they want to wound you accurately. Yes, that happens. Human nature is not always noble. The Stoics knew that. They did not live under the illusion that every approach is benevolent. They understood that discernment is just as necessary as kindness. When you reveal your fears to someone without judgment, you may be handing that person the exact language of your insecurity. And later, in an argument, a dispute, or a subtle provocation, they may touch that exact place. That is why Stoic wisdom does not recommend indiscriminate emotional exposure. Self-knowledge is not the same thing as public confession. Yes, you need to know your fears. You need to face them, examine them, weaken them through reason, just as the Stoics would. But that is very different from offering them to anyone who shows curiosity. Marcus Aurelius dealt with fear quietly and with discipline. He observed the mind, questioned impressions, and reduced the size of his inner phantoms through clarity. He did not turn that into a spectacle. He did not chase easy sympathy. He pursued inner command. That is the difference. The wise man does not deny what he feels, but he chooses with extreme care before whom he reveals himself. In today's world, many people encourage exposure as though every opening were healing. It is not. Sometimes it is only emotional recklessness wearing the costume of sincerity. Healing requires a safe place, real trust, depth. Outside of that, Speaking about what frightens you most may make you feel lighter for a few minutes and more vulnerable for a very long time. So when someone wants to know your greatest fear, pay attention first to the heart of the one asking. Not every deep question deserves a deep answer. Not every intimate curiosity deserves entry. And sometimes the best answer is precisely not to hand the world the exact name of what you are still learning to overcome. The sixth question also requires great caution because it usually appears in spaces where people compete without admitting it. How did you achieve that? At first glance, that can sound like admiration, and sometimes it truly is. There are sincere and humble questions asked by people who really want to learn, but there are others that carry a different tone. A tone of investigation, not in order to grow from your example, but to dismantle your merit, measure your strategy, copy your steps, or find something they can say to diminish your achievement. Notice how some people ask this question already prepared to invalidate the answer. If you mention effort, they say it was luck. If you mention discipline, they say you had privilege. If you mention consistency, they imply obsession. If you mention sacrifice, they brush it off. In other words, the question never wanted to understand. It only wanted an opening to reduce. The Stoic learns to recognize that pattern without being contaminated by it. Seneca knew that envy rarely attacks failure. It is bothered by progress. It appears when something in you forces someone else to face their own stagnation. And many times, the most polite way envy approaches is disguised as interest. That is why not every path needs to be told in detail. Not every strategy needs to be laid open. Not every behind-the-scenes truth needs to be revealed. There is value in preserving your method. There is strength in not turning your work into a manual for the curious. The important thing here is balance. This is not about becoming bitterly closed off. It is about realizing that generosity without discernment can turn into naivete. You can inspire without stripping yourself bare. You can help without handing yourself over completely. You can speak about the principle without revealing every mechanism of the process. The wise person does not feel the need to prove his merit in order to be validated. He knows what he endured. He knows the price he paid. He knows how many quiet mornings, how many invisible renunciations, how many doubts he overcame along the way. And that awareness is enough. Sometimes the best answer is a broad one. To say it came from time, discipline, mistakes, persistence. That is already true. And it is enough, because the person who truly wants to learn pays attention to the spirit of the answer. The one who only wants to intrude will remain unsatisfied even if you tell everything. And that is why the wise man learns to speak without handing himself over completely, learns to share without exposing himself, learns to teach without giving up his reserve, because not every question comes to honor your journey. Some come only to try to decode it, control your advantage, or drain your light. And in those moments, discretion remains a higher form of strength. The seventh question is one of the most deceptive because it almost always comes covered in intimacy. Are you really happy? That question sounds deep. It sounds sensitive. It even sounds noble. And in a few rare cases, it may be asked by someone who truly cares about you. But often it does not arrive as care. It arrives as probing. The person does not want to understand your soul. They want to find cracks. They want to hear hesitation in your voice. They want to catch some hidden exhaustion. They want confirmation that behind your composure, there is collapse. And this happens more often than most people realize. There are people who cannot bear to see you at peace, not because they openly hate you, but because your serenity confronts their chaos. Your stability reminds them of the instability they have not resolved. Your restraint exposes the excess they live in. So they ask with a gentle tone, what deep down they hope your answer will contradict. Are you really happy? Look at the trap. If you say yes, they may think you are pretending. If you say no, they may feed off that fragility. If you hesitate, they have already gathered what they wanted. That is why the Stoic does not turn his inner state into material for public evaluation. For the Stoics, happiness was never a trophy to display or a confession to distribute. It was the result of inner alignment, of living according to reason, of accepting what cannot be controlled and acting with virtue in what depends on us. Marcus Aurelius did not wake up asking himself whether he was happy in the shallow way that question is often used today. He was after something more solid: rectitude, clarity, duty, balance. And paradoxically, it is precisely the person who lives that way who finds a deeper peace than the performative happiness so many people try to display. When someone asks whether you are really happy, they may be asking for access to a territory even you should not expose carelessly. Because inner life has seasons. There are calm days and heavy days. There is serenity and there is fatigue. There is gratitude and there is struggle. To reduce all of that to a simple answer, in front of someone who may not even deserve the truth, is to shrink your own experience. The wise person does not feel obligated to translate his inner world for everyone. Not everything must be spoken aloud to be real. Not every truth needs to be revealed in order to be honored. You can answer with dignity. You can say you are living your process, that you have been learning a lot, that you are at peace with what you are building, and that is enough. Because the person who truly cares for your soul does not demand raw access. They notice, they respect, they wait, they do not force, they do not collect, they do not invade. The eighth question sounds ordinary, almost social, almost automatic, but it can hide one of the oldest intentions in human interaction. Who have you been hanging around? Again, the question is not always innocent. Sometimes it comes to control. Sometimes it comes to watch. Sometimes it comes to classify you based on the company you keep. Sometimes it comes to discover influences, connections, alliances, closeness. And in many cases, it comes loaded with premature judgment. The problem is that your network of relationships says a lot about your life. It says where you are investing energy. It says who you trust. It says who has access to you. It says what kind of environments you are moving toward. And in the wrong hands, that becomes valuable information. The Stoics placed enormous importance on company. Seneca spoke about the danger of living among people who contaminate the soul. Epictetus taught that if you spend too much time among those who live in confusion, your mind too will slowly incline toward confusion. Company shapes, influences, forms habits, and that is exactly why it should not be exposed as though it were meaningless. Not everyone needs to know who is inside your circle. Not everyone needs to know the names of those who have access to your time. Not everyone needs to map your emotional and intellectual alliances. Because once they know who you are around, many people will stop hearing you as an individual. They will reduce you to associations. They will interpret your choices through names. They will build narratives. They will assume motives. They will connect dots that do not exist. That is how life loses its simplicity. You say one name and judgment is born. You mention one friendship and suspicion appears. You reveal closeness with someone and suddenly other people begin reorganizing your image inside their minds. The wise person understands that protecting relationships is also a form of respect. Not every friendship needs to be announced. Not every partnership needs to be explained. Not every closeness needs to be translated to satisfy outside curiosity. And there is another more delicate point. When you reveal too much about your relationships, sometimes you also expose people who trusted you. And that matters, because the indiscreet person does not only fail to protect himself, he also fails to protect others. Stoic discretion is not selfish, it is ethical. It understands that certain names, certain meetings, certain connections deserve silence not for mystery's sake, but out of honor. So if someone wants to know who you have been with, pay attention first to the spirit behind the question. The person who loves your growth wants you to have good company. The person who envies your growth wants to catalog it. The person who respects you does not pressure. The person who wants to use you keeps insisting. And that difference, though subtle, changes everything. The ninth question is perhaps one of the most dangerous of all, because it touches something that loses strength once it is spoken too freely. What's your next move? This question is related to the one about plans, but here there is something even more delicate, because it is not only about what you dream of, It is about the exact movement you may be about to make. It is about concrete direction, the next step, the next turn in the road. And there is a deep reason to protect that. Your next move carries energy. It carries concentrated intention. It carries the living momentum of someone who is still in motion. When you start announcing that move too early, part of that energy scatters. And more than that, you invite interference, too many opinions, too much advice, too many doubts, too many expectations, too much cheering from people who are not going to walk beside you. Too much criticism from people who have never built anything, but always show up to comment on what others are trying to build. Marcus Aurelius understood the dignity of silent action. He knew that a man should concern himself with doing what is his to do, not with narrating every move as though he needed an audience. That is a powerful lesson for our time, when almost everything is announced before it exists, shared before it matures, celebrated before it is solid. The wise person does something different. He acts, and then he lets reality speak. There is something deeply powerful about the person who does not need to communicate every intention. The person who is not constantly trying to prove he is moving forward. The person who does not seek witnesses for every inner or outer change. That kind of person walks with greater freedom because he is not carrying the weight of public expectation over everything he does. And that matters. Because when too many people know your next move, too many people begin to speak as if they have a right to your direction. Some try to rush you. Others try to slow you down. Some project fear. Others project desire. And little by little, your decision stops being quietly yours and starts being contaminated by outside noise. Epictetus would remind us that inner freedom requires us to distinguish what is under our control. And one of the things that most needs to remain under your control is your direction. Not direction in the abstract, spoken in pretty phrases, but concrete direction, the living decision, the next step, the real movement. Your next move does not need to be explained to everyone. Sometimes it only needs to be made. And here is one of the hardest truths to accept. Not everyone who asks where you are going wants to see you arrive. Some only want to know where to watch from. Some want to know what to criticize. Some want to know when to interrupt. Some only want to measure whether you will really have the courage to do what you say. That is why there are moments when the wisest answer is a discreet smile and very few words. I am moving forward. I am building. I am continuing what makes sense for me. Anything more than that is often already too much. And when you understand these 9 questions, you begin to see something larger. This is not only about avoiding uncomfortable conversations. It is not only about escaping invasive people. It is about governing your own presence in the world. It is about not living at the mercy of other people's curiosity. It is about not allowing any question to become a key that opens inner doors that should still remain under your protection. That is one of the clearest signs of maturity, when you stop answering by reflex and start answering by choice. Most people live on autopilot. They get asked and they talk. They get provoked and they react. Someone hints at something and they justify themselves. Someone pokes at a weak spot and they expose themselves. But the Stoic does not live like that. Between stimulus and response, he builds a space. And in that space lives freedom. This may be one of the greatest gifts Stoic philosophy offers to ordinary life, not only enduring pain, not only accepting fate, but learning not to be dragged around. Learning not to be pulled into every battlefield other people create. Learning not to turn every conversation into an accounting of your soul, because that is exactly what many people want from you. Access. Access to your insecurity, access to your fear, access to your plans, access to your intimacy, access to your weak point, access to what is still under construction. But a strong life is not a fully exposed life. A strong life is a well-guarded life, not hidden out of cowardice. Guarded out of wisdom. There is something deeply powerful about someone who no longer feels the need to explain everything. Someone who no longer tries to convince everyone of the legitimacy of his choices. Someone who understands that peace is not negotiated with invasive curiosity. And notice, This does not make you cold. It does not make you arrogant. It does not make you inaccessible. It makes you lucid. It makes you selective. It makes you whole. Because the person who talks too much about himself usually loses energy in three places. First, in the exposure, then in other people's interpretation, and finally in regret. But the person who has learned to measure his words preserves strength, preserves clarity, preserves the freedom to move without constantly managing what others know, think, comment on, or expect. Seneca understood that peace of mind depends greatly on knowing where not to enter. And that applies to questions too. Not every question deserves a complete answer. Not every question deserves a deeply sincere answer. Not every question deserves any answer at all. That is an art. The art of discernment. The art of seeing not only what was asked, but why it was asked. Because two people can say the exact same sentence with completely different intentions. One asks out of love, another asks out of comparison. One asks out of care, another asks out of envy. One asks because they want to understand. Another asks because they want to use the information later. The wise person learns to hear beyond the words, learns to notice the tone, the timing, the look, the insistence, learns that human language is never made only of what is said, but also of what is being sought through what is said. And maybe you are beginning to realize now that many of your deepest drains did not come from major tragedies, but from small concessions, small answers given to the wrong people, small details revealed too soon, small explanations offered to people who never deserved that kind of access. That is how energy leaks away, not all at once, but little by little. One conversation here, one careless confession there, one plan shared too early, one vulnerability revealed in the wrong room, one long explanation to someone who had already decided not to understand, and without realizing it, you begin to feel exhausted not from life, but from exposure. Stoicism offers another path. A path of calm firmness, of dignified reserve, of intelligent silence, of solid presence. You do not need to be a wall, but you do not need to be a display window either. You do not need to push the world away in bitterness, but you do need to learn to choose who truly comes in. And that choice changes everything. It changes the quality of your relationships. It changes the strength of your projects. It changes the way you move through conflict. It even changes the image you build of yourself. Because when you stop explaining yourself all the time, something new begins to happen inside you. You begin to feel that your life belongs to you again. You no longer need to ask for permission to exist. You no longer need to defend every decision. You no longer need to translate every pain. You no longer need to turn every choice into a public argument. And that return to inner sovereignty is deeply Stoic. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by power, war, judgment, envy, and instability, left us a silent example. Preserve the center. Do not hand the government of your mind over to outer turmoil. Do not offer your peace to the first curious glance. Do not allow the shallowness of others to determine the depth with which you expose yourself. There is something sacred in what is inward. Not sacred only in a mystical sense, but sacred in the sense of being valuable, something that deserves care, something that should not be touched by just any hand. Your inner direction is like that. Your pain is like that. Your fears are like that. Your bonds are like that. Your plans are like that. Your next move is like that. All of this demands more than sincerity. It demands judgment. And judgment is a form of mature self-respect. Maybe for a long time you believed you had to answer in order to keep peace with others. But maturity teaches an uncomfortable and liberating truth. Many times, to keep peace with yourself, you will have to disappoint other people's curiosity. You will have to refuse the game. You will have to smile without opening up. You will have to close the subject without guilt. You will have to understand that politeness is not submission. Kindness is not self-exposure. Honesty is not stripping your soul bare for anyone who knows how to ask pretty questions. And here, in the end, everything returns to the central point of Stoic philosophy: self-mastery. Mastery over speech, mastery over reaction, mastery over the impulse to justify yourself, mastery over the anxiety to seem transparent, mastery over the desire to be understood by everyone. Because the truth is, you will never be understood by everyone, and trying to make that happen is a prison. There will always be people who distort, who reduce, who misunderstand, who use your words against you, who see weakness where there was honesty, who see arrogance where there was a boundary, who see mystery where there was only reserve. But the wise person accepts this, accepts that not controlling other people's interpretations is part of life. And because he accepts it, he begins to speak less in order to convince and more in order to preserve what matters. In the end, the great question was never only which questions you should avoid answering. The great question is this: who has access to your inner world? Who has the right to touch what is most delicate inside you? Who has truly earned the right to hear your whole truth? Because a poorly guarded life becomes vulnerable to invasion, but a well-guarded life blooms with greater strength. And maybe that is what you need to remember from this day forward, every time someone approaches with too much curiosity, too much rushed intimacy, too much specific interest, too much insistence. Not every question is an invitation to dialogue. Some are tests, some are traps, some are reflections of the emptiness of the one asking. Some are attempts to open a door in you that should remain closed, and your duty is not to satisfy every curiosity. Your duty is to protect your soul. May you learn to recognize the value of the right silence. May you stop justifying yourself to people who never carried the weight of your road. May you protect your plans while they are still fragile. May you guard your pain while it is still healing. May you not hand your fears to unprepared hands. May you preserve your peace with the same discipline you would use to protect something rare, because it is rare. In a world where everyone talks too much, discretion is power. In a world where everyone explains too much, silence is strength. In a world where everyone wants access, boundaries are dignity. And perhaps a true Stoic is, among other things, someone who has learned this silent art. The art of not answering everything, the art of not handing himself over completely, the art of remaining master of himself, even when the whole world tries to pull a confession out of him. In the end, whoever governs his own answers governs his own life, and whoever governs his own life has already begun to be free.
And before you go, subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this, more Stoic wisdom, more clarity, and more strength for everyday life. And leave a comment below telling me where you're watching from. I always love seeing how far these ideas travel, and it means a lot to know which part of the world you're listening from.